velkomin á málstofu Hafrannsóknastofnunar. Í dag fáum við gest frá Bandaríkjunum, Woods Hole, Robert S. Pickard. Hann hefur verið hérna að sinna leiðangrum í samstarfi við Hafrannsóknastofnun og hefur aðalega verið að taka þátt í mælingum núna undanfarið á djúpstraumi Íslandshafs. Og hann ætlar hann er með fullt af glærum, mikið að tala þannig ég ætla ekki að kynna hann eitt mikið meira. Bob, as I promised, brief introduction in Icelandic. The floor is yours.
Well, I guess I should say thanks for that introduction, but I have no idea what the introduction is. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And please ask questions as I go along. That would be great. So what I'd like to tell you about today is some of what we learned over the last decade or so on the circulation of dense water in the Iceland Sea. And I want to state at the outset that MFRI has been central to this entire effort, every step of the way, and in particular Kevin Valdemarsson, who has been, and his group has been central in everything I'm going to talk about today. So I wanted to make that clear. Here are a few of the people that I singled out for this particular talk, but the list is long, when you talk about such a body of work. So I'm going to say we through the whole talk, and we means many people, and certainly not just me. Okay, so as an outline, I'm going to say a few words about the importance of the dense water formation in the Nordic Seas as motivation. And then the way I thought I'd give the talk today is sort of chronological, okay? So sort of a narrative of not only what we found, but sort of the thinking that we've gone through as we take these steps. So, sort of like a story. And so again, please ask questions. And as part of the story, I'll start with a review of sort of the history of what we've understood about this formation of Denmark Strait overflow water. And I hope you'll walk away at the end of the talk with the thought that there's been a renewed importance of the Iceland Sea as a contributor to the dense water in Denmark Strait. Okay, so the region of the Nordic Seas is a critical component of what we call the North Atlantic Conveyor Belt, and this is that overturning circulation in the ocean that's critical for maintaining the climate of our planet. And as part of this overturning circulation, you have warm water that ultimately has come from the Gulf Stream system, and it works its way up north and crosses the Greenland-Scotland Ridge, goes into the Nordic Seas, and then in that region it undergoes a big transformation because of the cold atmosphere. And essentially this warm water becomes colder, denser, it sinks, and it forms what we call overflow water, and these waters then progress back to the south. They cross the ridge in gaps in the ridge as what we call overflow plumes. And this dense water eventually converges into what we call the deep western boundary current, and that's the lower limb of this overturning circulation. So Denmark Strait is of particular importance because it's the largest contributor to the deep western boundary current. So not surprisingly, there's been a lot of interest over the years in the sources of that dense water that feed Denmark Strait. And I'd like to go through some of the schemes that have been presented through the years as sort of context to where we are today. So the first definitive scheme for the formation of Denmark Strait overflow water was this paper by Swift and Agard in 1981, and they argued that this water is really coming from the Iceland Sea here. Oh, and I wanted to point out, when I present these schemes, I'm using the original figures from the papers. I thought that was neat rather than showing more modern renditions of them. So here's the original figure from this paper, and the idea was that this dense water was being formed here in the Iceland Sea through sort of convection and overturning, and then that water would get entrained somehow into the East Greenland current here and be carried down in through Denmark Strait. So that was the first definitive scheme. And then another scheme that was somewhat similar, about a decade later, was put forth where, by a similar process, convection in the open part of the Nordic Seas, but this time the Greenland Sea, that water formed here was again somehow entrained into what we call the East Greenland current, and it was carried down into Denmark Strait. So the thing about these two schemes was that all the action was happening in the interior basins of the western part of the Nordic Seas. That's where all the transformation was happening. So then, some years later, the community was kind of turned on its ear, as expression that we use, somewhat a controversial idea, if you will, and it was put forth by a graduate student at my institution, actually, a Norwegian named Cecilia Ritzen. And her idea was that, okay, here are these two basins, here's the Iceland Sea and the Greenland Sea, and they're not really the source of the Denmark Strait overflow water. What's really going on here is that it's the boundary current system. It's the water that comes into the Nordic seas, and it just stays in the boundary current, and it comes around and exits. So this is her original figure. It's not the best of figures. So here's a little more modern version of that, so you can understand what she said. And that is, again, you have this warm Atlantic origin water comes through intense heat loss. It just stays in the boundary current, and some of it just continues right around the perimeter of the basin and flows out. Okay, so that's sort of taking away the importance of those interior regions of transformation. And it's sort of like a paradigm shift in terms of how we understand this process. And like many papers that involve paradigm shifts, this was a controversial idea, and she had trouble getting this published. But eventually it was published, and eventually was accepted by the community, which was great. But then, just a few years after that, another study sort of turned the community on their ear, and this was by two Icelandic oceanographers, one of them who's sitting here in front row. Another paper that was a bit controversial, and I also think another paper that they had a little trouble getting it published. But what they showed, interestingly, is that, okay, there's something else going on besides the East Greenland Current. And they essentially demonstrated the existence of a flow of dense water along the Iceland continental slope, not the Greenland continental slope. And in this paper, they argue that much of that water flows right into Denmark Strait, and in fact, it's a major contributor to this Denmark Strait overflow water. Okay, so again, that was a whole new idea. So let me show you the evidence, or some of the evidence that they used. It is from the Horn-Bonnke section here that you're probably all very familiar with. And what these authors did is they showed some direct velocity measurements, okay? And so here's the continental slope of Iceland, and here's just velocity, and they showed the presence of this jet here, mid-depth intensified. They call this thing the North Icelandic Jet, or NIJ, all right? And in these two realizations taken in 2 different years, it's flowing right towards Denmark Strait. All right, so let me give you another view of that from the next section down, the Koger line here, okay? And now, unfortunately, you're looking in the other direction, okay? So here's Iceland. And one of the characteristics of this system is that you have dense water that's pulled way up here on the continental slope, okay? Now, that was nothing new, all right? The previous studies knew about this water being banked up on the slope, but what was interesting is that even back with the Swift and Agard paper in 1981, everyone thought that this was a signature of intensified flow going to the north, near the bottom, all right? But what Shevin and Sangrimer showed was that no, it's not intensified flow at the bottom going northward, it's actually flow going to the south that's intensified in the middle of the water column. Okay, so it's a very interesting configuration of flow, sitting right next to the northward flowing, warm, salty North Icelandic Ermir current. Okay, so let me just show you real quickly here. If you take the entire section all the way to Greenland, I just wanted to show you what we have. Here's that dense water that we've been talking about on the slope, and here's the NIJ. All right, so that was the new current that was discovered. Here's that rim current, the shelf break EGC. That's the one that Cecilia Ritzen talked about. It's going around the perimeter. But I just wanted to point out that there's another feature here that we call the separated EGC, and this is just an offshoot from this thing. So if you were to go a little bit further upstream, these two are actually a single current over here in the shelf break. So you sort of have 3 currents, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later in the talk. Okay, so with this great discovery was, of course, a huge question mark. And the huge question mark, where did this current come from? All right? And that's where I started to get involved with my collaboration with Kevin and his group. So the first thing that I did was I took one of our research vessels at Woods Hole in the Nore, and at the end of a field program, we had some time, and we thought we'd sort of scope this out a little bit. So we started in Denmark Strait here, and we did a series of sections going upstream, and just wanted to follow this North Icelandic jet to see what it looked like and where it was going. So here are some sections that I'm going to go through, and this is temperature, all right? So here's the cold water that's banked up on the slope, and you can see as you go farther to the north here, there's the arrow showing you where you are, you see the dense water is just banked up on the slope everywhere, okay? So that was interesting to see, and at this point in the cruise, this was the very end of the cruise, and we wanted very badly, we wanted very badly to know if this current was present on the other side of the Colbensee Ridge, which is right here, okay? So just in the last bit of time that we had, we were able to do one last section, and there you had it. There's still some dense water banked up on the Colbensee Ridge, okay? And let me just show you the velocities sections that go with that. Here is that North Icelandic jet present in all of the sections as you work your way to the north. Sometimes there seem to be 2 branches, sometimes there seem to be 1 branch, but it was there all the way up to the Colbensee Ridge, okay? So that was very exciting because it implies that the current existed on the other side of the ridge, okay? So we ran out of time on this cruise, but luckily next year we went out on the research vessel Bjarni with Kevin, and they normally do their standard sections, as you know, around the island. So we brought a velocity instrument that we stuck on their CTE package to measure the velocity directly, okay? So here was the cruise in August 2009. The 3 sections right up to the Colbensee Ridge here showed that dense water, all right? So the big question was, what's happening on the other side? And on the other side, yes, there was still dense water banked up on the continental slope. And interestingly, here's the velocity. This is a crucial measurement. Yes, on the other side of the Colbensee Ridge, on these 2 sections, we still had evidence of this current. So this current, the further we went upstream, it was still there. However, if you look closely, it looks like it's starting to get weaker on this last section here, okay? So that's where we stood in August 2009. So at that point, all right, there's all this evidence that, this flow is existing around Iceland, but where is it really coming from? So at that point, I was able to go and get some new funding from the U.S. National Science Foundation to try to take the next step. And so what I did in this program is sort of what we call an image. We threw the kitchen sink at it. I just did everything I could in one cruise to shed as much light on this as we could. Now, interestingly, some of the models had suggested that this NIJ, or North Icelandic Jet, could come from a variety of locations. One of them, here's the Colbensee Ridge. So one model suggested it came down here. Another model suggested it came down the Jan Mayen Ridge. And there was some talk about maybe it came along Ice and Faroe Ridge. All right, who knows? Maybe it come from the south along this location here. So we just did everything we could in one cruise. All right, and it was quite lightning. And not actually going to show you the results of that cruise because we kept going. We kept doing measurements on the Bjarni. We did some more measurements. And now, as in right now, there's a manuscript that's finally in preparation, about to be submitted. This is by a Norwegian graduate student at the University of Bergen in Norway. And what she's done now is taken all of the data that we collected over the last however many years and stuck it all in one map. So here are these standard lines, and these numbers are the numbers of occupations that we've done. So it's been a lot of work, a lot of ship time to get all those measurements. So Stephanie put them all together, and this is what she found. Okay, so here's our map, and I'm going to take you from east to west, all right, starting up here, all right, so this is the easternmost section. And as you progress, I just want you to notice that there's the dense water that's pulled up on the continental slope at all those sections. Okay, no surprise. However, the velocity is quite interesting, all right? In that, when you look at that easternmost line, sitting right over here, the NIJ is gone. This is actually, there's no flow in the NIJ. And in the very next one over, the one that I just pointed out a couple of minutes ago, it's just very weak at that location. And then it gets stronger and stronger as you go towards Denmark Strait. Okay? So if you were to actually look at the transport of this, the current kind of comes out of nowhere. It sort of originates or emerges from this location, and it decreases in strength steadily, and then sort of reaches a plateau and comes into Denmark Strait. All right, so that's about what we know about the NIJ. Very curious system, and how it sort of comes out of nowhere. So here's a schematic of what this looks like then. It, again, sort of comes out of this location here, and this is the path. It sort of follows the 600-meter isobath. And I wanted to point that out because that's kind of interesting, okay? Because the sill depth at Denmark Strait is just about 600 meters. And I don't think that's a coincidence that the NIJ is sitting at 600 meters. I think there's probably some dynamical reason, all right? There's some sort of control that's going on in the Denmark Straits that's helping to draw that water at the magic isobath, okay? That's just a thought at this point. That still needs to be addressed, probably using numerical models. So we had all these shipboard measurements. We put them all together. We got this story about the NIJ kind of merging from nowhere and heading into Denmark Strait. So we decided that the next step might be to do some moorings, all right, get a more robust view. So 4 different institutions, you can see them here, pool our resources together, and we stuck 12 moorings on the Kruger line, going from the Greenland Shelf Break to the Iceland Shelf Break, all right? And that was out for a year, and here's what the sort of the mean section is from that mooring array. So this is temperature, and each dot is a mooring instrument, okay? And we had some what we call moored profilers here, so these were instruments going up and down, so we got some really good resolution where the NIJ, we expected the NIJ to be. So here, again, here's the mean temperature section, and here's the mean velocity section. So looking at the different components here, this mooring here got the edge of the northward flowing warm North Icelandic Armor current. Here's the rim current, okay, that's the one that Maritson talked about that goes around the perimeter of the whole Nordic seas. Here's what I mentioned earlier, that separated component of the East Greenland current. And here is the NIJ. So again, you can see it's mid-depth intensified, okay, strongest right in here. But you can also see it's kind of merged with this other current here. So that made it a little bit more complicated to figure out what was going on. Everything sort of merging together towards Denmark Strait. The NIJ merging with the separated EGC. So we had someone, my postdoc took the lead on this analysis, and he did a pretty clever way of trying to separate out those components. All right, so he was able to look at each component of the system and over a year-long span talk about the transport. So here's the total of all those branches. All right, here's all the dense water that's flowing through Denmark Strait. The total is about, on average, about 3.5 spherotrops, which is a very reasonable number. It agrees with some estimates that have been made near Denmark Strait. And there's some variability, okay? But if you look at the different components, this red line is all the East Greenland current water, both those branches, the one in the shelf break and the separated branch, okay? All the stuff that's come around the rim, all right? And there's a little more variability of that. And then when you compare it to the NIJ, okay, here that's in blue. So we can see robustly that, you know, the NIJ is about a third of the transport. And interestingly, it seems to be largely out of phase with the EGC. So when the EGC gets large, the NIJ gets small. Okay, it's not always that way, but largely it is. And we think we have an explanation for that. We think it's due to regional winds in Denmark Strait, but I don't have time to get into that, but we do have an explanation for that. Okay, so we learned much more about the NIJ from the mooring array, all right? How it, the yearly partitioning of transport, many other things, but we're still left with that fundamental question, how is the NIJ formed, all right? So I wish I had an answer for you today, but I don't. But we do have a hypothesis at this point. And the hypothesis comes from a model, all right? In fact, it's a very simple model. And I don't have time to go into the mechanics of the model, but let me explain to you what the model is telling us, all right? It's telling us that there's a second overturning loop in the Nordic Seas, all right? Here's the first loop I told you about, right? The rim current loop that goes around the rim, all right? But in Cecilia's scheme and all the other schemes since then, no one talked about this water here. So there's about roughly a spherotrop of warm water coming into the Nordic Seas. No one ever talked about that. But what the model suggests is that this water, okay, this current, essentially starts to fade out, okay, and it spits out a lot of the water in terms of swirls or eddies, all right? And these eddies then sort of propagate up to the north. The water in the eddies gets transformed because of the cold winter, and then through some interesting process, some of it migrates back, sinks, and forms the NIJ. So there's sort of a local overturning loop. And that's, in terms of a schematic, this is what it looks like, all right? This current coming up here, forming these little eddies, all right? These eddies migrate up, they lose heat to the atmosphere, the water becomes dense, somehow that water comes back towards the boundary, sinks, and then forms the NIJ. And that's just a model result. It's not been confirmed with observation because it's a very difficult thing to confirm with observations. Okay, so it's a working hypothesis. Now, that paper came out, I think it was 2011. Since then, we're starting to poke holes in that hypothesis, okay, some significant holes. So let me tell you about one of the holes that's been poked in that. And that's been a nice paper done by Vogt et al. 2015. And what they did is they took all the historical data in the region, and they looked at the winter time. And here is a map of the wintertime mixed layer characteristics. Okay, so in wintertime you get overturning, you get a mixed mixed layer. This is what that mixed layer looks like in wintertime. This plot is density of the mixed layer, and this plot is the thickness or the depth of the mixed layer. And these white lines, I don't know if you can see the white, yeah, you can see the white lines. Those are the Iceland Sea gyre streamlines. So already this tells us that the model says that the transformation is happening here, okay? But the data tell us that the deepest, all right, or the densest and the deepest mixed layers are actually occurring outside the Iceland Sea gyre. So it's much more likely that this would be water that's feeding the deeper part of the NIJ rather than the middle of the gyre. So that's a major hole, and it's a hole that we still are trying to figure out, okay? So the latest thing that we've been working on then is to try to understand better the relationship between the atmospheric forcing and the NIJ. All right, so what we did recently, and this is a paper that's just been submitted, is we used 2 years of mooring data from that same array, okay? In year number 2, we just stuck out one mooring right at the NIJ core, so we have a 2-year time series, all right? So with that 2-year time series, we're trying to correlate it with what's going on in the atmosphere. All right, so these two maps here are a mean map using a new reanalysis called ERA5. So I think this is about 15 years worth of data averaged together, and it tells you the mean. This is 10-meter winds of the vectors, and the sea level pressure is in color. Contours here. And then over here is the turbulent heat flux. So it tells us, those of you who live in Iceland probably already know this, very strong northerly winds in the mean, and you have the strongest heat fluxes sort of in a band here. This is the ice edge, so you have the strongest heat flux a little bit seaward of the ice edge. So what we did in this paper then is we took the month-to-month variation of the NIJ and we correlated it with the month-to-month variation of the wind and the month-to-month variation of the heat fluxes everywhere in this domain. All right? So you compute a correlation coefficient between those two variables. And then we lag them in time. All right? If the atmosphere lags and then leads the velocity of the current. All right? And we got a very clear result. All right? So here's the result. This is a plot of correlation coefficient between the mooring velocity and the atmospheric fields lagged in time. All right? So this is -3, -2, -1 months. Okay? And you can see that you're getting, this great correlation when the atmosphere leads the velocity of the NIJ by 2 months. Okay? So I say 2-month lag here. The velocity is lagging the atmosphere by 2 months. So that's kind of interesting. And then if we do the same for the heat flux, we get the same result. All right? We get a high correlation for a 2-month lag and almost no correlation for any other lag. All right? And if we look at the different components of the heat fluxes, all right, latent heat flux, sensible heat flux, same thing. We get this interesting correlation with a 2-month lag. So, why a 2-month lag? And why is it in this region where I just got through telling you that the deepest and densest mixed layers are way up here? So what's magical about that region? So we think we have an answer for that. And it's based on a very nice, elegant model study that was published a couple years ago, Spall et al. And in that paper, they did an idealized sort of case where they have an island, all right, and they chose a little spot here, and they forced it with the atmosphere and forced convection, all right, forced dense water transformation. They chose this spot here, all right. They could have chosen any spot around the island, it doesn't matter, but that's the spot they chose. And what happens here is when you get the real strong air-sea forcing right in that patch, it overturns the water column, the whole thing becomes denser, the sea surface drops a little bit because the water column is denser. And when that sea surface drops, it excites what we call a Kelvin wave, okay? Don't need to know about Kelvin waves, but it excites a wave, and that wave propagates around the island in a clockwise direction. Okay? So you set off a wave, actually it's a set of waves, and they propagate around the island like this. And when those waves go by, in their wake, it sets up a circulation in the opposite direction. And that's what these black lines are. These are streamlines going in the opposite direction. So this whole process sets up a counterclockwise flow around the island. That's very interesting. Okay? This is what that counterclockwise flow looks like. Okay, there's the slope of the island, and there's the flow. All right? And this is actually the propagation of the waves. All right? So this is a very simple plot. The color is the depression in sea surface. All right? So there's where the convection convection site was, and then this is the angle around the island, and this is time. All right, so as you go around the island, that signal propagates up like this. All right, so it goes around the island as time goes by. And this sort of gives you the range of the propagation speeds of that wave. All right, the fastest waves go by at 15 centimeters per second, the slowest waves go by at 2 centimeters per second. All right, so that's what sets up this circulation. All right, so now let's go back to our observations in that funny 2-month lag. All right, so here's the region where we saw this sensitivity. All right, so let's say the convection is happening here. All right, and here's our mooring site. So if you follow an isobath, the 500-meter isobath, around the island, all right, then it's got to go that distance, and if it travels at 15 centimeters per second, it takes 3 months to get there. And to me, that's tantalizingly close to the 2-month lag that we saw. All right, I don't think that's coincidence. I think that's just explaining that. I don't know. It's a Kelvin wave speed. That's right. So what's your question?
Yeah, then I was just thinking about it. This speed has something to do with the depth and this phase speed of some of these.
I read the paper and I don't remember what was setting the phase speed. All I remember is that there's a set of phase speeds depending on, there's a range of waves, and it's between that wedge. And so and what the result of that wave responds is it sets up a change in the sea surface height, which, through geostrophic setup, sets up this circulation that's going around the island cyclonically. Okay, good. So the numbers work out that when this wave would go by, if it's going at 15 centimeters per second, it should set up this cyclonic circulation. So what that is explaining is as when the atmosphere does something, all right, 3 months later, that current is responding, okay? But it still leaves the question, what's special about that region right there? Why that region, all right? And there's an answer for that, okay? And that is because the way this mechanism works is you have to have convection on the continental slope of the island. That way, the wave's going to go around the island. If you're away from the continental slope, this mechanism doesn't work. So when you're way up here, where you're getting these really dense and deep mixed layers, that mechanism doesn't apply. It only applies to the slope. So if you take this isobath and you look and you follow it, there's only one location, and that's at the Coleman Sea Ridge, where this isobath intrudes into the interior here, and that's where you're seeing the densest and the deepest mixed layers anywhere on that isobath. So that demonstrates why that is the magic spot that's causing this whole mechanism to go. Okay? So that's the explanation. All right? So what that tells us then is this study is sort of telling us why, or is explaining the variation of the NIJ in terms of the atmosphere. Okay? What it doesn't tell us still is where is the water actually coming from that feeds in and forms the current. Okay? So that question remains today, and I don't have an answer for that today. But that's okay. It gives us more reason to come up to NFRI and continue our collaboration for years ahead. Okay, so that's pretty much the science part of my talk. I wanted to just take a couple minutes, if you don't mind, to show you say a couple things about the last thing we did. It was just about a year ago today. We were out with a ship here and an aircraft. It was a program called the Iceland Greenland Seas Project. I shouldn't say was, it is the Iceland Greenland Seas Project. This was our field phase. It was a big effort. It took us 8 years to get this thing off the ground. 8 different countries, 70 different PIs, postdocs, students, etc. So it was a really big effort. NFRI was part of the team. So we took a research vessel and an aircraft, and we studied the Iceland Greenland seas in the dead of winter, just a year ago now. We got a great data set. That's the great news. Here's what the ship did. Covered a lot of ground. All right. This is what the aircraft did. It was based out of Akureyri, had lots of flights, many of them in coordination with the ship, so we were able to work together. So again, we walked away with a fantastic data set. That's the good part of the story. The bad part of the story is last winter was wimpy, was really, really weak, okay? And I can blame the meteorologists on that one, wherever you're sitting. What happened was there was something called a sudden stratospheric warming event. I've never heard of a sudden stratospheric warming event. Right now, it's a dirty word in my vocabulary. Because what that did is called the winds coming from the east rather than the north, all right? So half of our time out there, we were suffering from, very anomalous conditions. So sadly, we're not going to be able to answer the definitive question about where the source waters are coming from for the deep part of the NIJ based on this data set, this hard-earned data set. That's not to say we're going to make some great strides. We're going to make some great strides forward. We're just not going to get the definitive answer. Okay, so let me just show you two quick movies from the aircraft and from the ship. All right, so you saw the picture of the aircraft. It's owned by the British Antarctic Survey. It's a Twin Otter. All right, you couldn't pay me money to go into that Twin Otter and go up and fly into a storm. But these guys, that's what they did. And here's a short little clip, like 10 seconds long, of what it was like to be in the aircraft. Oops, maybe not. Okay, that's very good. We're going to play it again one more time real fast, but just to point out, it's a small aircraft. They only have 1 to 2 scientists in there at a time, all right? And if you look at the various monitors, you can see that's what they're doing, and you can also see the track of the plane. And again, this thing was flying over top of the ship a fair amount of time, all right? And the other thing is that they did some measurements up high, and then they would do what they call the sawtooth measurements, and then they would do measurements low. And this part of the movie here is when they were doing the measurements right above the sea surface of the ocean. But even a wimpy winter has its storms, right? So here's a 30-second clip from the worst storm that we encountered, and of course it was in the middle of the night, right? And we were not all that far from the ice edge, and we were on this research vessel run by the Italian Navy. So you're going to hear some Italian in the background, and I'll tell you in a bit what they were talking about. This was footage from the bridge of the ship.
Sì, perché siamo qua, mi sta chiedendo Richard che ad occhio non si riesce a vedere se è fattibile, proviamo a sbracciare. Rispetto a prima abbiamo molto vento che entra dentro.
Io sono quasi al limite con le macchine, comandante. Quindi così c'è il rischio che andiamo in blackout.
Accoppiato, signore?
Sì.
Da ponti coperti continuo a dire che c'è troppo vento.
Okay, so you saw what the conditions were like that night. What they were discussing was whether to put the CTD in the water or not. Okay, I think you know what we decided, right? Okay. All right, so thank you very much. I just wanted to close with this wonderful picture of two of my favorite research vessels side by side in Reykjavik. So, thank you very much.
So please ask questions on this in this mic, if you will.
Hi Bob, thank you very much for your presentation. This is working, can you hear me? Yeah. You mentioned something about some mesoscale eddies probably on the north part, and it has been for mesoscale eddies that have been studied lately that they show that there is some, when they interact with the atmosphere, they can trap energy underneath them and they can actually release energy from there. And is that's usually that's now trying to, for the work that I've done in the Gulf of Mexico, they try to explain some formation of deep water due to this type of mixing in mid-levels. Do you think that could contribute as well? And what you said that there are too many mesoscale eddies. Have they been sampled as they pass through the moorings? Can you detect some of the high energy content within them?
Okay, that's a really good question. I don't have a very good answer for that. the water mass transformation being different within the eddy versus outside the eddy. That's not really my area of expertise, and maybe that's part of the story. But I can say that these eddies have been observed. I have in a longer version of this talk, I show one of those eddies in particular. But the larger question here is, how efficient is that process, that formation of eddy process, and does that current, the North Icelandic Ermir current, does it really spin down? And I think that's another potential hole that we're poking in that hypothesis. I'm not sure the NIIC spins down as much as that model says it does, and I think it continues around and then maybe separates on the eastern part of the island. So it still needs to be sorted out, and what you said may be interesting. If there's some sort of a more of a effective way to get more water mass transformation in an eddy field, that could be part of the story. Just, I don't really know that yet.
If no one has a question, I have one. So radioactive isotopes, have they not been used to kind of get an idea of the time, how long or what time it takes for the current to move and from where?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and again, I'm not really the person to answer, but there have been a whole suite of tracers that have been used to help identify the sources of the Denmark Strait overflow water and also the time scales, like you're talking about, how long the water takes. Again, I'm not the person to answer that, but I can say that some of those tracers have been used to help verify this rim current scenario, okay? But at the same time, they've also demonstrated that some of that water has to come from those interior gyres. And one particular program that comes to mind is they actually had a purposeful release of a tracer called SF6. It's not radioactive, but SF6. And they traced that. And they released it into Greenland Sea, and it eventually showed up in Denmark Strait some years later. So, yeah, I think chemists is better equipped to answer that question. But I will say that I think they're sort of upset with themselves for that purposeful tracer release, because it's making it more difficult to sample the natural SF6 that comes in from the atmosphere. So I think they're sort of kicking themselves for that tracer release. But anyway, that's sort of an aside.
A very quick question. What's next?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, that's a great question. What's next? We were discussing that this morning. Yeah. Well, as part of the IGP, we had another mooring array that was east of the ridge, so we're going to be analyzing that and analyzing all our data. That's probably what's going to keep us busy for the next couple of years, analyzing all the data we got from that IGP program. But, as you know, and you're asking, there's more to do, and so we'll have to think about that. I think one thing for sure is as we move forward, we're definitely going to have to do a model data combination, because this is such a complex thing, this spinning up of a current out of nowhere, and where does the water come from? It's going to have to involve models and data at the same time.
All right, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you for a very good talk.